guys, so today I'm going to talk to you about why we shouldn't care about animals in the wild. Before I actually do that, I'm going to make a little recipe. This is a recipe for blueberry pancakes, which should be really, really nice. I know it's right after Pancake Day, but yeah, hopefully you'll like it and hopefully you'll be watching all year round. So yeah, definitely check it out. Okay, so for our pancake mix, I'm going to add 1¼ cups of self-raising flour. Yeah. I'm then going to add some sugar, and this is just to taste. I like quite a bit of sugar normally, but I'm not going to add too much this time because I've got a bit of tooth erosion and I don't want it to get worse. Okay, so a bit of sugar. I'm going to add some baking powder. You don't really need much of this as you're using self-raising flour, and you don't want it too baking powdery either, I don't think. So just a little sprinkle of that. And then we want to add some salt as well. Just a tiny bit of this to give it a bit more flavour. Right, so now what we want to do is just mix around the flour and all the other ingredients. And now we're going to add 2 dessert spoons of oil. And the next thing is you just want to add some soy milk. And you want to add this until it's a nice kind of thick batter so it can go on the pancakes. Well, so that it'll make a pancake batter basically. Right. So you just add a little bit at a time and then mix it around. Right, so now that this is a nice thick batter, I'm just going to add the blueberries in there. And then mix them all around. Yummy, yummy blueberries. They are quite nice. These ones are getting a little bit, I don't know, getting a little bit squashed and juicy. So I think it's good we're adding them to pancakes, to be honest. And the juice should come out a little bit and go into the mixture. So it should be really nice. Right, so I just wanted to show you a tip I do for frying up pancakes. So what I do is I put a tiny bit of oil in the pan and just let it heat up. This makes sure the pancakes don't stick to the pan. I've spent one too many times not heating up the oil, and then the pancakes have ended up like really bad, like half cooked in the middle, because I didn't heat up the oil properly. So definitely heat up the oil when you're making pancakes, I would say. Right, so now that the pancake's done on this side, I'm just going to flip it. Flip, 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 flip. Do be very careful so it doesn't leak. Oops. Oh, that's quite a good one. It's got a bit of browning there, so it should be good. I think these are quite nice because they do pop up a little bit, as you can see, and they just stay put in the same shape, I think. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to try my little pancake for you. I put some peanut butter on it, which is really, really yummy, so it should be quite nice. Nice, which I find a bit unusual, seeing as I didn't really put that much sugar in them. Taste a little bit savoury almost, but yeah, the blueberries definitely give them a nice sweetness, and then you've got the crunchiness from the peanut butter as well, so it's really good. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about now is actually how we can reduce animal suffering in the environment, and how I don't really think this is possible. So let's go into it. So the first thing I wanted to separate was there's 3 different concepts. One is wildlife rehabilitation, one is the environment and conservation, and the other one is actually the ecosystem as it is. One suggestion on how we can actually reduce animal suffering in the environment is by ecosystem modelling. Now this is where you create a simulation of the ecosystem to work out what you can do in this case in order to reduce animal suffering. It's normally used when there's some kind of environmental problem, or you need to manage the environment in some way. For example, you have fishermen who want to continue fishing and a fish population. So that kind of thing. But one idea is that you could use this type of model to reduce animal suffering in the environment. So how you could do this is by eliminating all of the predators in the environment, and giving the prey animals contraception. However, I think that this would be very dodgy. One of the reasons I think this would be very dodgy is the prey animals are actually food for a number of animals. I remember seeing a documentary once, and the documentary essentially showed this dead elephant, and this dead elephant had died on some kind of conservation animal sanctuary type thing. And what they did was they put the dead elephant into the environment, and it fed like 25 different animals. All of these were animals that were scavengers, and also decomposer animals like obviously the worms and the other bugs and insects like beetles. So the other thing that I find is, in terms of the contraception used, there would be huge environmental problems with that, because essentially what you'd be doing is you'd be trying to create like the Garden of Eden like type area. So you'd be somehow getting rid of all of the predator animals, and then you'd be giving contraception to all the prey type animals, but then the contraception that you're using would obviously be tested on animals, and the raw materials would have to be dug up from the ground somewhere or created in a laboratory somewhere. And so the raw materials would harm the environment, because you're having to mine these raw materials to create these contraceptive devices. And then you'd have to test those contraceptive devices on animals, so that will cause harm to animals as well. The other thing that I find is that with this idea, you would have less biodiversity. So you'd have less, as you don't have the prey animals, the predator animals, you'd have less biodiversity in the environment itself, and so there'd be less animals in a specific amount of space, because those animals would have died, or they wouldn't be able to survive there anymore. And that's problematic to me, because if there's less animals, you've obviously caused some kind of animal suffering to put yourself in that position. So I don't think life modelling in terms of, or environmental modelling in terms of an effort to make there less suffering in the environment is a very good one. The other thing I find is that if you had this idea of an ecological model, then what would happen is the animals that are prey animals wouldn't have their own rights or self-determination anymore. One of the rights, so if we thought of this in a human context, if you had a tribe of humans and you had the man-eating tigers, let's say, essentially the humans in this population, if you killed all the man-eating tigers, and you said to the humans in this population, oh well, there's going to be too many of you because there's not enough man-eating tigers anymore, we're going to give you all contraception so that there are less humans born, then those humans might just think, well, you know, we want to have children and would prefer to just have man-eating tigers running around, and them occasionally eat one of us, than be controlled by you and be told that we can't have kids anymore. So essentially, by making a decision for those animals, and by saying to those animals that you can't have children because we've decided that that it's bad for the environment or something, I think that that's problematic, because if we want our own self-determination and our own rights, we have to kind of afford those rights to the animals as well, I suppose. And I think you're better off to leave animals alone than choose for them, I would say. So now I'm going to talk to you about conservation. And conservation is very different from very different from animal rights. I'll get into this in a minute. However, what I did want to say about conservation is that it's quite a good idea, because conservation can help to reduce certain pollutants in the atmosphere, which will help animal suffering. It can be used to reduce the amount of fishing in an area and make sure that the fishermen aren't fishing when there's the fish are breeding and that kind of thing. So yeah, conservation efforts can actually be a very good thing. However, at the same time, conservation efforts often favour one type of animal over another. So if we think about the red and grey squirrel in the UK, the grey squirrel has actually essentially taken over the whole of the UK. It came here about 100 years ago, and since then it's bred and bred and bred and bred, and you have pretty much all grey squirrels in the UK. You could actually get rid of the grey squirrels by again giving contraception to all of the grey squirrels. However, the contraception itself, I know that hormonal contraception, when you're giving it to humans, it causes issues like cancer and blood clots, and also things like bone fractures as well. That's another issue. I'm not quite sure what this would do to the health of the grey squirrels, but I wouldn't be surprised if at least a certain percentage of them die due to the awful health implications that hormonal contraception could have. The other issue that I have is, again, with the raw materials. As I said before, if you're mining these raw materials to make these contraceptives, that would harm animals and the environment, and so would the animal testing involved with actually making these forms of contraception. You could actually cull all of the animals, but again, this would cause more issues because you're killing animals in order to save another species, and that's obviously quite a bit of animal suffering. The other thing is that I honestly feel like the grey squirrel is probably better adapted to the UK. The grey squirrel can eat nuts when they're not quite ripe yet. They eat hazelnuts when they're kind of like a greeny colour. They have more babies than the red squirrel, and so it seems to me like sometimes with environmental studies you're just picking one species over another, which I just find quite sad really, and you're basically making one animal suffer for the other animal. The same kind of thing applies to monocultures. Now, I'm not saying that we should let monocultures spread and spread and spread and spread, but if we have a monoculture of, let's say, Chinese, Japanese, so we've got a weed, let's say, that is not native to the country, and it's growing everywhere. Now, you'd have less biodiversity in that area, and if that weed spread and spread and spread into other areas, then obviously that would harm animals in the environment. But if the weed is in one area, if you get rid of all of the weed in that particular area, then essentially by doing so you'd be killing animals that are living there, because there are always going to be certain proportions of animals like beetles and bugs that thrive in an area with some, unnative weed. So I don't know, it's difficult because often you're just choosing the suffering of one animal over another. So the second thing I wanted to go over was wildlife rehabilitation. This is where you actually get an animal from the environment, like you get a bird from the environment. Like the bird's had its, I remember kind of saving a bird once, and it had no feathers on one wing, like completely no feathers here. and basically you take that bird to an animal sanctuary, or maybe there's a fox that is orphaned and he's without his mum, and you take him to an animal sanctuary, and the animal sanctuary looks after that animal. Now, sadly, there is actually a dark side to wildlife rehabilitation. Some animals that are being rehabilitated by wildlife centres are never actually released into the wild. I remember once there were two foxes that were adopted as cubs into this animal sanctuary, and they basically lived in a barn and they were going to live in the barn for the rest of their life because the animal sanctuary took them in and then they became too tame to be released back into the wild. So really, there are people that would say that they would prefer to be dead than locked up in a barn for the rest of their lives. I mean, I'm not one of those people personally, but you're essentially making that choice for the animal, and I don't know that you really have the right to do that. And so I suppose it's quite difficult in that sense as well. Right, so in conclusion, there isn't much that we can do to reduce animal suffering within the environment. The only ways that we could possibly reduce animal suffering within the environment are looking into ways in which, like things like chemical spills and making sure that the oil doesn't continue going into the environment, and kind of reducing pollutants in the environment. We could try and do wildlife management programs where you have a fishing area in one area and a fish area in another, or a wildlife area in another. So yeah, I think you can kind of help help animal suffering by managing what people can do and managing the impact that people have on animals. But you can't reduce animal suffering by limiting what predators do or what prey does, because that would be essentially taking away the prey and predator's rights, and it would be quite tricky to do that anyway. I think that really what we need to be doing is we need to be leaving animals we need to be leaving animals alone as much as possible. Anyway, thank you for watching, guys. Please subscribe and like this video, and yeah, comment down below if you like it. Also, it would be really interesting if you commented on ways in which you think we could actually help animals within the environment, or wildlife animals. So that'd be really interesting. Anyway, thank you for watching, guys.